What if everything you thought you knew about the Gospels was incomplete? 4 men. 4 completely different stories about the same man. But here's what nobody tells you: they're arguing with each other. And that's exactly what God wanted. The question isn't why 4 Gospels exist, it's why you've been reading them wrong. Matthew couldn't sleep. Not that night. Not after what he'd seen 3 decades earlier, when the man he'd collected taxes for Rome had walked past his booth and said 2 words that destroyed everything: "Follow me." Now in his small room in Antioch, the former tax collector stared at the parchment before him, his hand trembling. The Jewish community was tearing itself apart. They were screaming at each other in synagogues from Jerusalem to Damascus. Is Jesus the Messiah, or isn't he? You have to write it down, Benjamin had told him that morning, gripping his shoulders. They're forgetting. They're arguing about genealogies, about prophecies. They need proof. Matthew had laughed bitterly. Proof I watched him raise the dead Benjamin. What more proof? They weren't there. Benjamin's voice cracked. My son thinks Jesus was just another rabbi, my own son. Write it down, Matthew. Make them see. So Matthew wrote, but not the way others might have expected. He began with names. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, 14 generations. Then 14 more. Then 14 again, each name a promise, kept each generation a step closer to the throne, because that was what his people needed to hear. This wasn't some random miracle worker from Nazareth. This was the king they'd been waiting for since David died. You're making him too Jewish, Mark said months later, standing in Matthew's doorway covered in dust from the road. The younger man looked exhausted. The Romans will never understand this. The Romans? Matthew's voice rose. This isn't for the Romans. This is for... It has to be for everyone. Mark moved into the room, his intensity filling the space. I just came from Rome. Peter's been preaching there. Do you know what they ask? They don't care about David. They don't know who David is. They want to know what Jesus did. They want action. They want power. Matthew studied the younger man. So write it yourself. And Mark did. But when Matthew saw the scroll months later, his hands shook with something like anger. Mark had cut everything. No birth narrative, no genealogy. Just a man shouting in the desert, "Prepare the way." And then Jesus moving like lightning through Galilee, healing here, casting out demons there. Immediately, immediately, immediately. The word hammered through Mark's account like footsteps running toward something terrible and necessary. Where's the king? Matthew had demanded when they met again in Caesarea. He's there, Mark shot back. But these people don't need a king. They need a servant, someone who understands what it means to suffer under Rome. A servant, Matthew's voice dropped. He's the son of David, the son of, He called himself the Son of Man. Mark's eyes blazed. Over and over he said he came to serve, to give his life. You're so busy proving he's king that you're missing what kind of king he actually was. The argument rang through the house. In the corner, a third man listened, saying nothing. Luke, the physician, had been taking notes. He'd been taking notes for months, traveling to every village, interviewing every person who'd known Jesus. Mary, his mother. The shepherds who'd somehow still been alive. The women who'd followed him from Galilee. People Matthew and Mark had barely mentioned. You're both wrong, Luke said quietly, and both men turned to stare at him. Or rather, you're both right, but you're only telling half the story." "Half?" Matthew's face flushed. "I traced his lineage back to Abraham himself." "Yes," Luke said, "to Abraham. But I traced it back to Adam. Because this isn't just about the Jews, Matthew. And it's not just about Roman power mark. This is about every person who's ever felt forgotten, every woman who's been ignored, every poor man who's been crushed, We included those stories," Mark interrupted. "You rushed past them," Luke said, and there was no anger in his voice, only sadness. "You were so focused on getting Jesus to the cross that you didn't stop long enough to show who he stopped for along the way. The widow at Nain, the woman who crashed the Pharisees' dinner, the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son. These aren't just stories, Mark. They're the whole point." Matthew shook his head. "The point is that he's the Messiah, the fulfillment of the point," a fourth voice said from the doorway, "is that he's God." They all turned. John stood there, white-haired, now, ancient his eyes, carrying something that made the other three fall silent. The beloved disciple. The last one left who'd actually leaned against Jesus' chest at that final meal. "You're all describing a man," John said softly, stepping into the room. "A special man, a powerful man, a compassionate man. But you're not telling them what I heard that night on the mountain when Peter and James had fallen asleep, and I was the only one awake to hear him pray." His voice dropped to a whisper. He wasn't praying to God. He was talking to himself, the Word, the light, the one who was there in the beginning before anything else existed. The room held its breath. "I'm going to write it differently," John said, "because they need to know that when they touch the hem of his garment, they're not touching a prophet's robe. When he says their sins are forgiven, it's not presumption. When he says he is the way and the truth and the life." "John," Matthew interrupted carefully, "that sounds like heresy." John's eyes crinkled. "Blasphemy. Yes, that's exactly what the Pharisees said, right before they helped nail God himself to a tree." The silence stretched until Mark laughed a harsh, startling sound. "You can't write that, John. You'll get people killed. People are already being killed." John's voice stayed steady. "Nero burned them alive in his gardens. Domitian's feeding them to lions right now in Rome. They're dying, Mark. They're dying because they believe in a good teacher, a wise prophet, no. They're dying because they met God wearing skin. And once you've seen that, once you've really seen it, you can't go back to pretending the world makes sense without him." Matthew stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "The Pharisees will use your words against us. They'll say we're making him equal with God." "We're not making him anything," John said. "We're finally saying what he told us himself. I and the Father are one." You were there, Matthew. You heard it. "I heard a lot of things." Matthew spun around, and suddenly he wasn't the careful scribe anymore. He was the tax collector again, the collaborator, the man everyone had hated. I heard him tell us to be perfect as God is perfect. I heard him say not one letter of the law would pass away. My people need to know he didn't come to destroy Moses. He came to fulfill every single promise God ever made to us. If I write it your way, they'll think we're starting a new religion. "We are starting a new religion," Luke said quietly, and both Matthew and Mark turned on him. "No," Matthew said. "No, we're not. This is Judaism completed. This is..." "Matthew." Luke stood his physician's hands steady. "I've interviewed hundreds of people. I've tracked down everyone who knew him. And you know what I've discovered? The people he saved, really saved, weren't the ones who had the law memorized. It was the Roman centurion who understood authority, the Samaritan leper who came back to say thank you, the thief dying next to him who had nothing to offer except, 'Remember me.' These people didn't know Moses from Adam, but they knew desperation. And when Jesus looked at them, they saw something that made them whole." "That's my point exactly," Mark jumped in. "It's about power. It's about what he did not, who his great-great-grandfather was. It's about both." Matthew's voice cracked. "Don't you see? If he's not the son of David, then Isaiah lied. Jeremiah lied. Every prophet who ever promised us a deliverer lied. I'm not writing genealogies because I'm bored, Mark. I'm writing them because without them, my people have waited 2,000 years for nothing. Your people." John repeated softly, and something in his tone made everyone freeze. "Matthew, do you remember what he said? The night before they arrested him, 'I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also.'" Matthew's jaw clenched. "I remember. Then why are you writing as if the only sheep that matter are Jewish?" John's eyes held no judgment, only sadness. "Why are you making it harder for the other sheep to find their way home?" "Because," Matthew slammed his hand against the wall, "because if we lose the connection to Abraham, to David, to everything God promised, then he's just another mystery cult god. He's just another Dionysus or Mithras or He's nothing like them," Luke interrupted, his voice sharp for the first time. "And you know why? Because I've documented his birth. I've talked to his mother Matthew, his actual mother. I know what she told me about the angel, about the virgin conception, about the shepherds. I've verified it with multiple sources. This isn't mythology. This is history. Specific, dated, documented history that happened when Quirinius was governor of Syria and Caesar Augustus was on the throne. You want to prove he's real? Give people facts, names, places, witnesses who are still alive to contradict me if I'm lying." Mark shook his head. "The Romans don't care about your witnesses, Luke. They care about results. They worship emperors who can't even heal a headache. Show them a man who commands storms, and they'll listen. Show them genealogies, and they'll fall asleep." "Then we're writing for different people," Matthew said coldly. "Exactly." John's voice rose suddenly, startling them all. "That's exactly it. We're writing for different people, because there are different people. Matthew, your account will reach the Jews, who need to see Jesus in their scriptures. Mark, yours will reach the Romans, who need to see power that makes their emperors look like children. Luke, yours will reach the Greeks, who need to see reason and order and proof. And mine?" He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice trembled. "Mine will reach the ones who are drowning, the ones who've tried everything else, the ones who need to know that the God who made galaxies learned what it feels like to have your best friend betray you with a kiss." The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. This time the silence held something like understanding. "So we're all right," Mark said slowly. "And we're all wrong." "We're all necessary," Luke corrected. "Every perspective, every emphasis, every detail one of us includes that the others leave out." Matthew exhaled slowly, his anger draining away. He contained multitudes. He was multitudes, John said, is multitudes, and if we each write down only what we saw, what we emphasize, what broke our hearts or changed our minds or set us on fire, then maybe together we'll get close to showing people who he really was. Close, Matthew repeated, and something like a smile tugged at his lips. But never complete. Never complete, John agreed. How could we? We're describing infinity with ink. Mark left first, clutching his scroll like a weapon. I'm going back to Rome, he announced at the door. Peter needs this. The believers there need this. They're dying without knowing why it matters. Wait, Luke grabbed his arm. You're ending with the women at the tomb, aren't you? With them running away, afraid. Mark's face hardened. That's what happened. That's where you're stopping. Luke's voice rose in disbelief. Mark, they need to know what happened after. They need to know he appeared to... They'll figure it out, Mark said, pulling free. If they can't connect those dots themselves, then they're not paying attention. He was gone before Luke could argue further. He's making a mistake, Luke muttered, turning back to the others. People need closure. They need to see the risen Christ with their own eyes, hear his voice, watch him eat fish, to prove he's not a ghost. They need the ascension. They need to wrestle with it, Matthew interrupted, and there was something new in his voice. Understanding, maybe. Mark's leaving space for doubt because doubt is honest. You think my people don't doubt every single day they ask me, if he's really the Messiah, why are we still under Rome? Why are we still suffering? Mark's saying, figure it out yourself. The tomb is empty. Now what are you going to do about it, Debikio? John moved to the window where Matthew had stood earlier. I'm going to write about Thomas. Thomas? Luke frowned. Why he doubted. He demanded proof. That's exactly why, John said. Because Thomas said what everyone thinks, but nobody admits. Unless I see the nail marks, unless I put my finger where the nails were, unless I put my hand into his side, I will not believe. And Jesus didn't rebuke him for it. He showed up and said, Here, touch me. Stop doubting and believe. Matthew's eyes widened. You're making doubt part of the story. I'm making doubt part of faith, John corrected. Because it is. Every person who reads our accounts is going to doubt at some point. They're going to hit a passage that doesn't make sense, a miracle that seems impossible, a teaching that contradicts what they want to hear. And if we pretend we never struggled with it, if we pretend it was all obvious and easy, then we're liars. Luke sat down heavily. I interviewed Mary Magdalene 7 times. 7. Because every time she told me about the resurrection, she remembered something new. Something different. And you know what I realized? She wasn't contradicting herself. She was trying to put into words something that broke language. How do you describe seeing someone you watched die? How do you explain the moment your grief turns into something that doesn't have a name? Yet, Tibama, you write it down anyway, Matthew said softly. Imperfectly, partially, from your limited perspective. And you trust that God can use broken words just like he used broken people. But what if we get it wrong? Luke's voice cracked. What if 50 years from now someone compares our accounts and says, look, they can't even agree on basic facts. Matthew says there was one angel at the tomb. John says there were 2. Mark says the women told no one. Luke says they told the apostles immediately. What if our differences destroy everything? John turned from the window, and his face held something ancient. Luke, do you know what I've learned in 60 years of following him? The people who want to disbelieve will always find reasons. And the people who want to meet him, really meet him, will find him in the cracks between our stories. They'll find him in the parts that don't quite match up, because that's where the mystery lives. That's where faith has to make a choice. A choice, Matthew repeated, tasting the word. To trust or not trust. To believe the impossible or walk away comfortable. John's voice dropped. We're not writing a legal contract, Matthew. We're not writing a history textbook, Luke. We're writing testimony. And testimony is always personal, always passionate, always incomplete. That's what makes it true. Luke stood slowly, his hands shaking. Then I'm going to write everything, every parable, every healing, every conversation I can verify. I'm going to give them so much evidence that some will believe and some won't. John finished gently. Just like when he was standing right in front of them in the flesh. Evidence doesn't create faith, Luke. It creates a decision. Matthew gathered his scrolls, and the weight of them felt different now, lighter somehow. My people are going to hate some of what I write. They're going to say I'm betraying Moses, but I'm going to write it anyway because he said it. You've heard it said, but I say to you, over and over, not destroying the law, completing it, making it about the heart instead of just the hands. And my people are going to think it's too simple. Mark's voice echoed in memory. Too fast, too urgent. But that's how it felt. Like standing in a flood, like trying to catch lightning. Mine will think it's too detailed, Luke said. Too inclusive, too focused on the wrong people. But those are exactly the right people. John picked up his own blank parchment. And mine will think I've lost my mind. That I'm making him too divine, too cosmic, too impossible. But that's what love does. It makes you see what was always true, but nobody dared to say out loud. 3 years later, Luke found Matthew in Jerusalem during Passover. The older man looked exhausted, his fingers stained with ink, his eyes hollow. They're copying it, Matthew said without preamble. My account? They're making copies and sending them to synagogues from here to Antioch. And Luke, his voice broke. They're arguing about every word. Good, Luke said, and Matthew's head snapped up. If they weren't arguing, they wouldn't be taking it seriously. Argument means engagement. It means they're wrestling with who he really was instead of just filing him away as another dead prophet. They're saying I made him too harsh, Matthew whispered. Too demanding. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. They say that's impossible. They say I'm setting people up to fail. Luke pulled up a chair uninvited. Did he say it or didn't he? He said it. Then you wrote truth. Luke leaned forward. Matthew, I've been reading what you wrote. Really reading it. And yes, it's demanding. Yes, it's hard. But you know what else it is? It's the only account that shows him weeping over Jerusalem. How often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. That's not harshness. That's heartbreak. Matthew's hands trembled. I included every hard teaching, every impossible command, because if I softened it, if I made it easier, then I'd be lying about what he actually asked of us. And I included every outcast he touched, Luke said. Every woman he elevated, every tax collector and prostitute and Samaritan who found grace, because if I left them out, I'd be lying about who he actually saved. He paused. We're both telling the truth, Matthew, just different parts of it. A runner burst through the door, gasping. Mark's gospel, it's in Egypt now. They're translating it into Coptic, and the young man's eyes were wild. They're reading it in one sitting, start to finish, 2 hours. They're saying it's like watching him die in real time. Matthew and Luke exchanged glances. That's what Mark wanted, Luke said slowly. He wanted them to feel the urgency, the momentum, the inevitability of the cross. My account takes weeks to study, Matthew said. Maybe months. Every genealogy has to be checked. Every prophecy has to be cross-referenced with the Torah. And mine takes careful reading, Luke added, following the chronology, noting the details, building the case piece by piece. The runner wasn't finished. There's more. John's gospel, it's spreading like fire among the Greeks. They're calling it philosophy. They're saying it answers Plato, that it's the logos they've been searching for all along. Plato, Matthew muttered. He's turning Jesus into Greek philosophy. No, Luke said sharply. He's showing the Greeks that their philosophy was always pointing towards someone real, someone they can actually meet. John's not compromising the message, he's translating it into language they can understand. Matthew stood pacing now. So we have my gospel for the Jews who need to see prophecy fulfilled, Mark's for the Romans who need to see power demonstrated, Luke's for anyone who needs to see evidence documented, and John's for the philosophers who need to see divinity explained. He stopped. And they're all different, irreconcilably different in places. Exactly, Luke said, and his voice held something like triumph. Don't you see? That's the point. If we'd all written the same account, people would say we collaborated. They'd say we got together and made up a story. But we didn't collaborate. We couldn't have Mark was in Rome. I was in Greece. You were here. John was in Ephesus. We wrote from memory, from passion, from heartbreak. And yet we all agree on what matters. Matthew finished his voice, wondering. He lived, he taught, he healed, he died, he rose, he's coming back. Everything else is emphasis, Luke said. Everything else is perspective. But those facts, those unshakable facts, we all witnessed them. We all stake our lives on them. The runner cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. They're starting to read all four together now. In communities, one person reads Matthew, then someone else reads Mark, then Luke, then John. And they're saying, he hesitated. What? Matthew demanded. What are they saying? They're saying it's like seeing him from 4 different angles, like walking around a statue. Each gospel shows them a different side, and when they put them all together, the young man's voice dropped to a whisper. They're saying they can almost see him whole. Luke's eyes filled with tears. Almost, but never completely. Never completely, Matthew agreed. Because how could we? We're finite beings trying to describe infinite love. We're broken people trying to explain the one who made us whole. We're going to fail. We have to fail. The mystery is too big for our words. But we write anyway, Luke said. We write anyway, Matthew echoed. Because even partial truth is better than comfortable lies. Because even fragments of light are better than complete darkness. Because even if we only capture a shadow of who he was, the shadow is enough to change everything. John's voice came from the doorway. The old apostle stood there, weathered and worn, but his eyes were still burning with that same fire. I've been writing for 3 years, throwing away drafts, starting over, trying to find words big enough. And I finally realized there are no words big enough, so I wrote the small words, simple words. God is love. I am the way. In the beginning was the Word. Let people spend their whole lives unpacking what those simple words actually mean. Matthew moved toward John, studying the ancient face. You're the last one now, the last one who actually walked with him. When you're gone, the words will remain, John said firmly. And that's what he wanted, not monuments, not institutions, not even perfect understanding. He wanted people 2,000 years from now to pick up what we wrote and hear his voice, to feel his hand on their shoulder, to know that when they're drowning in darkness, the light still shines, and the darkness has never overcome it. Luke stood his scroll tucked under his arm. I'm going to Theophilus, my patron. He's been waiting for my account. He's a Roman official, John, a man of power who needs to see that following Jesus isn't sedition, it's truth. And he'll read all 4, John asked. Eventually, Luke said, everyone will, because no single account will satisfy anyone completely. The Jews will read Matthew and hunger for the action in Mark. The Romans will read Mark and hunger for the evidence in me. The Greeks will read me and hunger for the mystery in you. And when they read you, John, they'll hunger to go back to Matthew and see the prophecies they missed the first time. We're not competing. We're compelling people to keep searching. The runner spoke up again, hesitant. There are others writing now, people who claim they knew him. Secret gospels. Different stories. They say he didn't really die, that he was just a spirit, that he taught hidden knowledge only for the enlightened. Matthew's face darkened. Lies. Convenient lies for people who want spirituality without sacrifice. Let them write, John said, and his voice was steel wrapped in silk. Let them write their comfortable fables. Truth has a weight that fiction can never match. When people read our accounts, all 4 of them, they'll know. They'll know we're not telling them what they want to hear. We're telling them what happened even when it cost us everything to say it. Everything, Luke repeated softly. Mark's probably dead by now. Martyred in Alexandria, they say. Peter's gone. Paul's gone. And we're writing, Matthew interrupted. That's what we have left to give, these words, these testimonies, these 4 imperfect, contradictory, essential portraits of the only perfect man who ever lived. John moved to the table where Matthew's scrolls lay scattered. He touched one gently. Do you know what I think? I think God could have written one gospel himself. Come down, dictate it word for word, leave no room for doubt or interpretation or argument. But he didn't. Instead, he chose 4 broken men with 4 different perspectives, and 4 different wounds, and 4 different ways of seeing love made flesh. And through our brokenness, through our disagreements, through our different emphases, people get to see what we saw. That following him isn't about getting all the answers right. It's about letting the questions transform you. My people will read these for 2,000 years, Matthew said, his voice thick. arguing about every word, fighting about every interpretation, splitting into 100 denominations because I emphasized grace here and judgment there. My people will do the same, Luke said, and Mark's and John's. Good, John said, and they all turned to stare at him. Because that means they're still wrestling with him, still refusing to make him small enough to fit in their pockets, still discovering new facets of who he was every time they read our words. The day people stop arguing about Jesus is the day they've stopped taking him seriously. A bell rang in the distance, calling believers to evening prayer. The 4 accounts. Matthew's complete, now Mark's racing through the empire. Luke's finding its way to educated Greeks, and John's still being penned in Ephesus, would soon be copied thousands of times, translated into dozens of languages, studied by people who would never meet the man who walked on water, but would somehow know him better than his own brothers had. We're giving them pieces, Matthew said finally. Just pieces. But the pieces point to something whole, Luke said. Something complete, something that no single book could ever contain but 4 books together might reveal. John smiled that knowing ancient smile. He told us, you know, that last night. I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear. We couldn't bear it all. We still can't. So we wrote what we could bear, what we saw, what broke us, what remade us. And we trust that the Spirit he promised will take our insufficient words and make them sufficient for every person who picks them up and says, I want to know him too. They stood together in that room, 3 of the 4 gospel writers, knowing their words would outlive empires, knowing people would die for what they'd written, knowing their testimonies would be attacked, defended, treasured, and transformed into the foundation of something that would shake the world. 4 Gospels, Matthew said, not 1. 4 perspectives, Luke added, not 1 voice. 4 invitations, John finished, to meet the one man who was too vast for a single story, the one who said, come and see. And we're still saying it, through every word, every page, every testimony. Come and see for yourself. The runner left to carry news of their meeting to the scattered churches. The sun set over Jerusalem, and the words remained 4 accounts of one life that changed everything, written by 4 men who understood that sometimes the most powerful truth comes not from one perfect voice, but from a chorus of broken ones, all singing the same impossible, beautiful, undeniable song. He was here, he died, he rose, and nothing would ever be the same.